All right, welcome everybody. Welcome back. Today's session is the first session to our series this week, which will be on local innovations. And today's session will focus on implementing harm reduction. I'm going to give everybody a couple of seconds to jump in, but a couple of housekeeping things you guys are used to hearing by now. You guys are all muted, so yeah, just be aware the only way you can communicate with us is through the questions box, which will be on the side little taskbar. And also remember, participation equals gift cards, so you want to make sure if you have comments or questions throughout the webinar that you're using that to alert us of any topics you want to hear more about or questions you have for our Q&A session at the very end. All right, welcome everybody. So this session today is on implementing harm reduction. We all know harm reduction started as a grassroots movement 40 years ago and has become an evidence-based public health approach practiced around the world. So we're going to be talking to a couple of communities who've implemented a harm reduction approach in their veteran programming. And the session will be grounded in discussion of the research and evidence for harm reduction approaches. So we did have a couple of last minute changes. Lena will not be joining us today. David, if you will go ahead and take us to the next slide. We do have two guests for y'all, so I'm going to let them introduce themselves. We have Eric Elbergen, and then we have Maurice Carter. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Eric first, and then we'll do Maurice second.
Thanks, Jasmine. I am a research investigator, clinical psychologist at the National Center on Homelessness amongst Veterans. I'm also a professor of psychiatry at Duke University, and I'm going to give you an overview of what the science has shown about harm reduction strategies, particularly with respect to homelessness and with veterans. So if you could get my slides, that would be great. Otherwise, I could do it.
And then Marie.
Thanks.
So I'm Dr. Maurice Carter. I'm the program manager over at New Directions for Veterans in West LA, California. I've been doing this for a couple years now. My programs are pretty successful. My goal today is to help you, or at least answer questions about how to implement harm reduction techniques, how to best work with the veterans in implementing program structure, making sure your staff is okay. So yeah, just overall running the program and giving you tools and tips to manage during quarantine as well as just on a regular basis. Welcome, thank you all for coming.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys both for participating in the discussion today and your presentations. I know we have a lot of ground to cover, and so I want to go ahead and transition into the presentations. Just want to remind you guys one more time, please send your questions in throughout, and we will get to them towards the very end. So turn the time over to you, Eric.
Thanks. And yeah, I think a good way to think about Maurice and I working on this is that I'm going to be giving you sort of the background and the research, and Maurice is going to talk about how you actually do that in practice. Does that sound? That sounds about right. So next slide. So in case you don't know, okay, harm reduction is a model that aims at looking at effects of substance abuse, legal, financial, social, psychological, and you probably know this, but the person might still be using drugs. And so this was seen as an alternative to requiring that someone participating in a substance abuse program be abstaining from substances. So, you know, imagine you have someone who's had heavy use of alcohol or drugs for decades and then suddenly be required to just stop right then and there. And if they don't, then they can't be in that program. And that was then leading a lot of the people who most needed substance abuse treatment to not even be able to access it. So this recognizes that actually recovery can happen gradually, but it also recognizes that there are these other harms that are associated with substance abuse that need to be addressed, these other consequences, not just the substance abusing itself. Next slide. So really, harm reduction is a philosophy and a set of strategies that you're going to be hearing about today that, yes, a goal is certainly reducing consumption of substances, but that's not actually the focus. The focus is on engaging people who abuse substances in a program so that they might be able to address other kinds of behaviors that they engage in that are coinciding with the substance abuse. So there's been a number of reviews, but this model's been shown to be effective, where you could see a needle exchange service. It's not specific, it's making sure that there are not dirty needles and risky behaviors being transmitting bloodborne diseases, and those have been shown to reduce those, even though it's not targeting the substance abuse per se. Same thing with supervised injection sites. Those have prevented drug overdoses, risky behaviors, and actually engage people in the services. And opioid substitution methods, methadone, et cetera, have been shown to actually reduce crime and other harms. So you see that the harm reduction model, they are targeting people who have substance abuse problems, but are actually also addressing some of the consequences of substance abuse. Next slide. I think another important aspect of the harm reduction model, it's really grounded in a person-centered, meet someone where they're at framework. It really values what is it that this participant in the program wants. What are their psychosocial goals? What do they want with respect to their work life, their social life, with their living situation, finances. In other words, relationships, community involvement. It really talks, it's about how you can you use a psychosocial rehabilitation framework by which you engage a participant and ask them what they want to do with their lives and how improving mental health and reducing substance abuse will help them reach that. And obviously both of those being the leading risk factors of homelessness would help reduce risk of future homelessness, which is another potential harm. But just personally, I was a local recovery coordinator at the VA, the Durham VA, for a number of years. And what that meant was I went around to all the clinical programs, including the homelessness programs, to try to help, in this case, you know, with the veterans, to help create a recovery-oriented, person-centered framework to try to meet veterans where they're at, for them to figure out, okay, what would be the incentive for a veteran to follow this treatment program? And that's very consistent with the harm reduction model. Next slide. So with respect to homelessness, Housing First was developed to meet the housing and treatment needs of homeless veterans, not veterans at first, but we'll talk about that in a minute, but the homeless population who have substance abuse and mental health problems, those being two of the leading factors predicting homelessness. And so Housing First says that housing is a basic right, and that Housing First says if you're participating in this program, we want you to be engaged in it and be self-determining what goals you want to have when you're trying to recover from substance abuse and mental health problems. This is really why this is a real harm reduction model, because it's not just so participants are given housing immediately, even if they have even if they are currently abusing substances, but they're also asked to define their own goals. And so they have these needs and goals, and they're given case managers in case management to help them achieve those goals. But again, the part of Housing First that's different and different from what was previously required, there's no prerequisite that participants be in psychiatric treatment or be abstaining from alcohol and substances. Next slide. This was this was one of the seminal important studies that conducted a randomized clinical trial, which I've got to say, having experience doing research, to conduct a randomized clinical trial of this scope, it's an enormous accomplishment, this study was. And so they took 225 participants. They randomly assigned them to either you get housing only if you're in treatment and are sober, or you get housing first and you receive housing even without those treatment prerequisites. So you know, they were randomly assigned, and they followed them for a long time, I believe about 24 months. And they wanted to see, well, you know, does this housing first work? And a randomized clinical trial is the gold standard for showing whether or not some kind of treatment leads to an effect. So what they found was, I mean, the participants in the Housing First, even though they were not required to be in treatment, they got housing earlier, they were stably housed, and they felt more perceived choice in what they were doing. And there's been a lot of research that shows that perceived choice and feeling self-determined, and it's actually, there's a whole self-determination theory, shows that people who feel more choice are more likely to adhere to treatment. And that was borne out in this data, because amazingly, even though the participants in Housing First were not required to be in treatment, they actually used it more. So, they used it, and there were no differences. Even though the control group, used it more, there were no differences in substance abuse or psychiatric symptoms. So I do take that back. That was a typo on my part on my notes. But yes, they were higher, but there actually was not a difference in the symptoms between the two groups, even though the control group was using it because they were required to. Participants in Housing First were able to obtain independent housing without compromising psychiatric or substance abuse symptoms. So there really wasn't a difference whether or not the participants in Housing First or the control group in terms of outcomes with psychiatric or substance abuse symptoms. They each had equivalent, even though the ones in the control group were in treatment more, but they were able to maintain independent housing. Next slide. This is actually very important, because there was another trial with veterans, and what they wanted to do is to see whether or not veterans who had chronic homelessness benefited from a Housing First approach. And they took veterans, 177 of them, and they were placed in either Housing First or treatment as usual, so that they might have been in other treatments that required sobriety. They may not have, but it was just whatever else they might have gotten. And you could see the housing first reduced time to housing placement significantly. Housing retention rates are higher in the housing first tenants, and emergency room use actually declined in those that are housing first participants. So there were definitely benefits to being in housing first for veterans, and provided empirical support for HUD-VASH's veteran homelessness program. Next slide. This is a part of harm reduction and homelessness that I think sometimes gets overlooked because a lot of veterans, some of them are service connected, they're getting income, but they're, you know, they might still mismanage that money. That might lead them to become be at greater risk of homelessness. And that sounds logical, but this is something that is not always looked at. And it actually relates to housing first in the sense that part of housing first allows participants to get case management, which includes both formal and informal money management. So one of the things to think about with veterans is there are these unique financial circumstances for veterans. Many of them are the first time they're paying a light bill, they're in their 30s, whereas their civilian counterparts were doing budgets in their early 20s. Unfortunately, sadly, predatory lenders target military populations, and they've shown that the largest concentrations of predatory lenders, payday lending services are in zip codes near military bases. That's been borne out in the data that service members are 3 times more likely than civilians to take out payday loans. So there are these unique circumstances that might lead to affect veterans' financial well-being. That's on top of the fact that many veterans, there has to be retraining once they leave the military for jobs. They may need to go back to school. And then, of course, there are physical and psychological injuries that could also affect work, and therefore their financial well-being. Next slide. And so what they've actually shown is that military service members are more likely to incur credit card debt than civilians. And that can have downstream effects and potentially, and this is a study that we conducted. We did a national survey of veterans, and normally I would be polling you, but I couldn't figure out the polling software. But if you had 100 veterans, 30 of them from this random sample survey, a national study we did, 30% of them reported this money mismanagement in just the last year, forging a check, going over credit limit, being turned over to a collection agency, falling victim to a money scam in the past year. What I could tell you is that all of those were related to substance use. But the question is, does that mismanagement raise risk of homelessness in veterans? Next slide. It does. I'll walk you through this. This is a multi-variable analysis predicting homelessness in the next year. And what this means is, I'll explain. So if a veteran has a history of arrests, that odds ratio means that if a veteran has a history of arrests, they are 2.65 times more likely to become homeless in the next year compared to veterans without a history of arrests. And if that p-value is less than 0.05, and that one is 0.0055, then that's called statistically significant. Mental health diagnosis. In this case, I'm gonna have to try to remember. I believe it was if a veteran had post-traumatic stress disorder, or major depressive disorder, they were 2.59 times more likely to become homeless the next year. Now you would probably think, okay, well, of course, so you see how the odds ratio for annual income is below 1. That means that the greater the income, the less likely someone would be homeless, and that makes a lot of sense. And what that means is that veterans who were making had an income of more than $50,000 a year were 70% less likely, so 1 minus 0.3, 70% less likely to become homeless in the next year. But the strongest predictor of homelessness in our sample was whether or not veterans had, at the beginning of the study, said that they engaged in those money mismanagement behaviors you just saw a minute ago, like bouncing or forging a check, going over credit ratings, and that was 4.09 times. Veterans who said that at the beginning were 4 times more likely in the next year to become homeless. And what this is important to realize is this is what's called multivariable analysis. Each of these is uniquely contributing to predicting homelessness. So this money mismanagement is still predicting it even when you're statistically controlling for income, mental health diagnosis, and history of arrests. Next slide. This is another way of looking at this. What we see is that veterans with high income and no money mismanagement, they barely in the next year, and high income is $50,000 a year or more annual, they barely had as 0.35%. And then not surprisingly too, the low income and money mismanagement had the highest rate of becoming homeless in the next year. But I feel like the two in the middle are the most interesting, because what it shows is that veterans who are actually making more than $50,000 a year income, but they were mismanaging their money, had a higher rate at 6.06%, had a higher rate of becoming homeless in the next year than veterans with low income and no money mismanagement. So I think that this really relates. Substance use costs money. That's money mismanagement. And one of the benefits of housing first, and that's one of the harms. It's not just legal, physical, social. There's also financial harms from substance abuse that a harm reduction approach, and particularly housing first, can address. And this provides support to show that the kind of work that Housing First does in terms of case management could be used to help assist veterans learn how to better manage their finances. And I've run money management groups for veterans and homeless veterans for the last decade, and can tell you firsthand that this is something that in the National Center on Homelessness Among Veterans that I'm currently working on, and trying to help get resources like this to homelessness programs. Next slide. So I'm going to review research in the last few years, just so you know where the field has gone, from Housing First, from the harm reduction models. There have been a lot of, as I described before, with needle exchange programs, with opioid replacement programs. Those have been well studied. Surprisingly, there's been a lot less research on the effectiveness of harm reduction strategies for and homeless populations for alcohol use disorder. But I want to report Collins et al. Last year, there was a publication of a randomized clinical trial of harm reduction for alcohol called Heart A. And they actually did a randomized trial of 168 people experiencing homelessness and who met criteria for alcohol use disorder in this really unprecedented study. Next slide. So they compared, they compared control participants, and they found that the experimental participants who were in the Part A had greater increase in confidence to engage in harm reduction. They had decreases in alcohol use, alcohol-related harm, alcohol symptoms, and urine tests. So they actually showed that in this model, compared to the other models, it actually, at least for short term, improved alcohol use disorders in this population. I think that gives good, at least some support that it's not just for reducing drug misuse, but also alcohol misuse. And that's a recent study. Next. And I would highly recommend that anyone read this review because while I was mentioning before that harm reduction is incredibly person-centered, it's interesting because and there have been a number of studies that have asked, okay, well, what is the perspective of people who are homeless? What do they think is effective harm reduction? And this is there were 23 papers that had asked this, but there's never been a review to consolidate. Okay, what are the things that our clients, the people who are serving in these programs, what did they see? What did they perceive as the most effective from their perspective, components of these programs? So I summarize them in the next few slides. Next slide.
Hey, Eric, just for the sake of time, would you mind going through the results and maybe fast forwarding to your last slide, because I think it has them all summarized, and you can get into some more specific measurements in the Q&A.
Absolutely. So very quickly, so really the conclusion is that it's the way that the services were delivered, and rather than the type. So it was that, and the bottom line is, if it was person-centered, that the staff generally understood their participants' complex lives, they were seeing it as better. We could skip this, but there's been a lot. You'll have it on the COVID pandemic, and this is really to hand it off to Maurice and the other speaker, in this case, him, that there's this research, but it's not done in a vacuum, and you need to have these different components of connections to the affordable housing and policies to engage across different programs and developing not just the harm reduction, but having that education for the public and organizational policies, which we're about to hear about. So thank you so much.
Awesome, Eric. Thank you so much. That was so much information. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm making sure you guys are able to hear me, but I see a lot of questions coming through, and they're a little bit more specific on dealing with the individual factors and elements, and so I think we'll get into some more of it more in depth in the Q&A. But thank you so much for that information. Like I was telling you guys in the very beginning, Lena's unable to join us today because of a family emergency that came up pretty last minute, so we're going to fast forward to Maurice, and keep sending your questions in, because we will get into a couple of y'all's specific questions in the Q&A. Let's turn the time over to you, Maurice.
No problem. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. So yes, I'm going to be speaking to you guys about providing safety and structure in a harm reduction model. Next slide, David. Usually when, let me introduce it. So New Directions for Veterans, we are a transitional housing program for homeless veterans that provide an opportunity for veterans to rebuild their lives. Our mission statement specifically is to empower men and women who served in the military and their families to lead productive and fulfilling lives. So our overall goal is to make sure veterans are getting housed and getting the support services they need to stay housed once they are housed. We do provide one-on-one case management. We do provide job resources. We do assist with money management in a couple of different ways. We have an awesome clinical team that provides clinical therapy and group therapy. And we also have the opportunity to do a little bit of aftercare case management for residents once they leave our program, which is about 3, maybe 4 months. Next slide. Next slide. No, there you go. So the process of, so the way that one would get into our program, we do come from a harm reduction perspective, and we do use trauma-informed care techniques. One of the things that we do when bringing a resident in the program is explain that our goal is to meet them where they're at. Yes, we have house rules and we have structure within our programs, but at the end of the day, the overarching idea is to meet them where they are, help them to provide, put services around them so that they can be successful, and to help them want to be successful. So when they're coming into our programs, we essentially get a referral packet with the necessary documents, TB test and COVID-19 test, as well as maybe a couple other documents, a homeless referral letter and things of that nature. Once we have those kind of documents, then an intake is done where the resident is asked risk assessment questions in order to figure out what program is more appropriate for them. Once that happens, then the program manager or the clinical director will also review those things, those documents, and we'll schedule an orientation for the resident to come in. Next slide. Orientations are pretty fun. That's when we sit down with the resident and we go over everything that they're going to be going through in the particular program, whether it's low demand, bridge, or our clinical treatment program. We make sure that we go over all the house rules from the beginning. And we do that when the case manager is actually meeting with the resident for the first time after being brought in the program. So we start the rapport building from the beginning with the resident. Make sure the case manager that's assigned to them is going over the same things that they would have gotten in orientation, the rules of the program, how the program works, how you get passes, how you get out, how you get to go out into the community, especially during quarantine, because here in California, we're still in shelter in place. So we had to modify a lot of the opportunity for them to leave and go as they would normally do due to COVID. So again, when they're being brought in the program, the case manager and the intake coordinator go over these things with them from the beginning. Once they've had all the knowledge and paperwork filled out, then we go ahead and we bring them in and we give them a bed and we give them a room number, but we also provide them clothes and a shower while we heat treat their clothes. So one of the things that we have to do structurally is make sure that we don't bring in maybe a bed bug infestation, or we're bringing in any type of vermin or varmint. So one of the things we want to make sure we do is from the beginning, heat treat all their clothes, give them fresh clothes, and allow them to get their shower before even going into the new bed that they've been assigned, to cut down on possible, again, infestations. Next slide, David. When that happens, after that is all said and done, they've been oriented, they're in the bed, they have their room number, they have their ID badge, they met their case manager. It's been a long day. And we always want to make sure that we go back and review with them, you know, later in the week about the services that we provide for them. So we always talk to them about us needing them to make sure, or wanting to make sure that they understand that they will get one-on-one case management. If they are in our clinical program, they will get clinical therapy or group therapy. However, even if they're not in our clinical program, we will provide a way for the clinical services with our clinical team. We do have, like I said, clinical treatment. We have a very great neurofeedback clinic, and our neurofeedback clinic has done a lot of good work helping residents calm them, you know, manage their anxiety a lot better, even improving in their sleep areas. The neurofeedback clinic is great. Our resources, we have resources for employment and benefits services. So we work with the VA on their compensation work therapy program. We work with them to provide an opportunity for residents to get back into the workforce and possibly get as an intern essentially and get paid. At the same time, while they're in CWT, this is also an opportunity to see if if going back to work is really what they want to do, and if so, what type of work would best benefit them. So, as well as being in our transitional housing program, we again work with the VA and sending residents over to get enrolled with their CWT program in order to help, one, put some more income in their pocket, as well as help them decipher whether or not going back to work is really what they want to do. One of the other services we provide is also our housing navigators to assist with our housing search. Our housing navigators have done another amazing job in keeping our residents, getting our residents housed in a very timely fashion pretty quickly and keeping them housed as well. Our housing navigators go out into the community and find apartments and property managers or apartment owners that are willing to rent to the veterans with the HUD badge voucher. And our housing navigators sometimes are able to work with the managers to avoid application fees or even having to go through a possible credit check. But doing everything upfront and honest in order to get the veteran housed and providing case management and a resource for the manager to have in case the resident does need extra assistance or needs a little bit more oversight than usual. So our housing navigators, our neurofeedback clinic, our clinical treatment team, our case managers, all of my team is why the programs are successful, and these are the type of services that we provide in order to make sure that the residents are successful. Next slide. So we do come from a trauma-informed perspective, and this is more about me. This is how the program is structured and how we make sure that we provide quality services and at the same time adhere to the trauma-informed philosophy as well as the harm reduction philosophy. So trauma-informed care is defined as practices that promote a culture of safety, empowerment, and healing. We at New Directions, we provide structure to keep the building safe by implementing curfews, a lot of times out for each program, meaning they have a certain time frame each day that they can be out without having to put in a pass per se to go out into the community. We schedule smoke breaks. We provide hand sanitizer at every entrance. We readily have gloves and masks readily available for the veterans to use as well as for staff. Our janitorial staff is always wiping and cleaning everything down. And in order for our residents to still stay connected with their groups and their group facilitators, we provided them iPads and in order to do this. So we have iPads that they can use to meet with their Dr. V on the internet or to go to their AA groups or their NA groups, as well as to be able to see their one-on-one therapist or participate in any group that they have. So we've done a lot of empowering them and helping them still be able to get the healing that they need in their clinical services by using technology, making sure they have the hand sanitizers, giving them time to be outside, giving them scheduled smoke breaks, things of that nature. Also, one of the things that residents, we do allow the residents to have and they appreciate is having the house meeting to talk about the changes with shelter in place and the new rules in the building. So a lot of the structure and organizational policies and procedure get discussed during this house meeting so residents are up to date and are abreast of all the information that's going on. And as well as this is an opportunity for case managers and clinical staff to answer questions if there are any in regards to the policies and procedures that we have. We have county testing. LA County Department of Public Health comes out and they do COVID testing in the building every 2 weeks. We also use the house meeting to talk to them about when the testing dates are coming and what's going to happen and who's going to be tested. We use these house meetings to validate their feelings and concerns and with regards to being in quarantine and shelter in place, because it's been difficult, you know, coming in. You've been outside and you've been on the streets and you've sort of had all this freedom, and now you're in a program where there's a lot of rules and there's curfews and you have to ask a lot of permission and come and go sometimes. So, you know, we use this house meeting to explain why we have the rules we have in place and the safety of the rules and the purpose of the rules as far as trying to keep the well-being of the building safe and so we don't have any epidemics or breakouts in the building. We also use trauma-informed care in the way that we created a schedule so residents can continue to receive their medications from the pharmacy. They can continue to meet with their housing team. We've made some changes to the mealtime so we can make social distancing a factor and actually be implemented and to accommodate for all for their mealtime. So they each get about a good 15, 20 minutes to eat their meal. And we still are here in the social distancing by having only 10 people in the kitchen or 10 residents in the kitchen eating at one time. So we're doing our best to stay trauma informed and provide a culture of safety and empowerment and healing. Next slide. So safety, oh yeah. Using harm reduction to create safety and structure. We set limits to what can and cannot be done while in program during shelter in place. So again, we start with safety from the beginning when they do orientation and they're coming in the program and being brought in the program. We tell them about the structure, the house rules, the building rules, GPD rules. We talk to them about all of these different rules so that they are not blindsided or caught off guard, and we let them know what the limits are to each of these things. We provide a space for residents to express themselves. Again, the house meeting and the big group meetings. Staff is being trained on a regular basis to stay calm and to manage their time so that they are not to be stressed out. We have residents that we've had to limit the visitations to deliveries only in order to adhere to shelter in place rules and make sure that we don't bring any outside possible COVID-19 exposure to the building. We're having signs that explain all the policies and procedures posted on bulletin boards. Again, we have our house meeting to explain the rules and policies. And New Directions we do a lot of training with our staff monthly, if not pretty much every week, in order to make sure that we are constantly being informed of any new changes, any updates, any new approaches to working with veterans, any new resources. So training for my staff is always going on, and my staff has done a good job of accepting the training, managing the training, and implementing the training on a regular basis, which helps to implement and maintain the safety in the building. So I give my staff credit on that on a regular basis. Next slide. Again, the way we do safety, we use harm reduction to create safety and structure. We set the limits. You can skip this slide, David. And again, we make sure that all the information is posted so everybody can see throughout the building. So again, based on the guidance, best practices for managing a building and managing our programs, we take a lot of the information from the CDC, our government officials, the county the Department of Public Health and Department of Health Services. So we implement social distancing during lunch on the elevators. We put up plastic glass barriers at our reception desk. We have hand sanitizer everywhere. Lord, we have hand sanitizer everywhere. We have masks and gloves readily available. We're providing scheduled times, and we're working with the residents on a regular basis to make sure that they're meeting their medical appointments and their housing appointments. Next slide. That is New Directions, Building 116. That is the building in which we provide great services to our residents. Next slide. For success, the success of our programs is solely on my teams. If it wasn't for my clinical team, the FSP team, the case managers, the RSAs, if it wasn't for those frontline workers and my staff, my programs would not be successful. If my staff was not able to communicate effectively with the veterans and to take the trauma-informed care and meet them where they are, we would not be successful. And I know on here I say, we've been able to keep our AWOLs down, but that's because the residents have also bought into being safe and understanding why we have curfews, why they only have so much time outside, why they can only do so many different things. And because of that, a strong team and strong buy-in from the residents, we're able to be successful at this time. So next slide. Bringing it all together. So after saying everything that I've said, here's what I want you to take away. In order for us to do all of these things, it's important to keep your staff a priority, meaning make sure that they are not burnt out, give them time to vent, listen to them, provide correction when need be, provide praise at all times, catch them doing something good, not always catch doing something bad. Stay abreast of information in the community with regards to what is open and what is closed. Provide staff the opportunity again to express themselves in a safe place with no judgment. Write up all policies created, posting for everyone to see, meeting with all parties involved to explain any changes or addendums to these policies and procedures. One of the things I know most people do hate is when things change and they don't know about it. So our goal is to make sure when changes are made, everybody's abreast of it. Set firm boundaries. I don't know how much harder I can say that, but you must set firm boundaries as an agency, as a structural organization. The boundaries are how you keep the structure in place and how you get the buy-in from everybody and stay consistent. By not flip-flopping, by not changing your word and going back every time something happens, you establish a consistency, and that's what setting firm boundaries for your staff and the residents to follow means in this case. Everybody's on one accord. You avoid any type of staff splitting. You avoid miscommunication and variations of policies being implemented. Staying firm and staying consistent is how you do that. Oh yeah. COVID has started, and we've done a good job of keeping it out of the building. Next slide, David. I think that's everything. That's good. Yep, that's it. Any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you for your time, everyone. I appreciate it.
All right, you guys. I'm not sure if my webcam's on yet. Okay, so we have a lot of questions that came in. I appreciate you guys both. It was a ton of information, and thank you for flying through towards the end. So one question that came through, and it kind of is addressed to both of you, is if you guys have any suggestions of how to incorporate harm reduction when it comes to assisting veterans with searching for employment.
So one of the things that we do is we talk to the resident about what it is that they're interested in, and we have a lot of job connections in the community. So we send them, we get job leads from the VA, we get job leads from the local one-stop centers or temporary agencies in the community, and we also try to sit down and talk to the veteran about, even if it's not a job, maybe even a volunteer service opportunity, so that they could possibly get out in the community and see if they really would like that type of job. So.
Eric, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yes, I was. Another thing I found working with veterans is a lot of them, and this isn't just veterans actually, it's non-veterans and veterans who receive disability and who are service connected, a lot of them have a belief that if they work, they automatically lose their benefits. And I think education for them, that is not true. The fact that they'll have more money in their pocket if they work, and connecting them with compensated work therapy or any of the other kinds of vocational rehabilitation goals that are local does not mean that they'll lose their benefits, whether it's Social Security or VA or both. I think that that's another important, and if you're already addressing that, that's fine. There's also on SAMHSA, just so you know, there's actually, it was done with the VA. It calculates how much a veteran can work. It's a calculator before the SSI, SSDI. It's very tricky. But if you type in SAMHSA, that's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, and calculator with veterans and disability and work, you'll find it, and that's also a handy thing to work with your veterans about.
Gotcha. Okay. So going back to the slides that you had touched on in the beginning, Eric, you pulled up a multivariable analysis. I know money mismanagement, it seems like was one of the, I think it was the absolute most impactful on becoming homeless. So somebody's question reads, basically, knowing money mismanagement is a large contributor, is there any manual offered to VA CO for staff to address with that?
That is a great question. So we did create so one thing is, if you email me at the VA, I can send you a list of 72 resources with different kinds of both financial emergencies, avoiding scams, how to get employment. So that it's called SAFE, Steps for Achieving Financial Empowerment, the dollar sign, SAFE. And that was our intervention. We tested it. But also so if you're working at the VA, we are creating, and this actually will be not just for VA, it's going to be an interactive website on the VA. It's a Veteran Center for Financial Empowerment that I've gathered a lot of information in 15 domains of financial knowledge, budgeting, jobs, housing, savings, and that's going to be available soon for both veterans and military family members, and for VA clinicians and case managers. So we're working on that right now. But email me and I could send you a resource list right now. And it's just my name, eric.elbergen@va.gov.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can go ahead and share the email towards the end of this webinar in the chat for y'all to copy them down really quick, because a couple of people have also asked for your email, Eric, and then yours also, Marie. So before we get off, we'll share them with everybody one more time. So I guess for Marie, how many homeless individuals do you have a month usually? How many staff do you have? There's a couple of questions that just have come through about the structure of y'all's actual program and your staff to veteran ratio.
So we are able to house 168 veterans in my building, and my staff, each of my staff, I have about 10 case managers. I can handle 10 case managers, and each one of them would have about a 16, maybe 17 person caseload. There's 3 programs. There's a low demand, there's a bridge program, and there's a clinical program. Each one is on a different floor. It's a 3-story building. We have our own kitchen. We have pretty much a lot of things are built in: our clinical rooms, our kitchen staff, our front desk admin, bathrooms, everything that you would imagine. And it's community living. So we're averaging 14 person to a room. The smallest would be maybe 8, maybe 2, depending on which floor you're on, but most of it is community living. No one has their own individual room.
Gotcha. Okay. There's a couple of questions that have come in about returning to homelessness, or people who have maybe lost their housing after having their HUD-VASH voucher at least once in the past. So I'm going to have you guys both share that question, but it's a 2-part. How can we better support veterans who historically have struggled to retain their housing with housing first practices? And then I also had a HUD-VASH social worker kind of write in along those same lines. Is there a way to facilitate a payee if federal benefits are being mismanaged, resulting in clinical homelessness?
Ooh, I know from my case managers, we do utilize the payee aspect when we figure out, because we covered 7 domains, housing, income, employment, medical, legal, social support. When we find out that they have an issue with managing their money for whatever reason, one of the big things we try to do is get them a payee through the VA if possible, or we try to set up direct deposit. So if the building that they're moving into has receives their rent electronically, when the resident gets paid, because usually they'll get paid and somehow or another they're broke in 2 days, we want the resident, when they get paid, we want the apartment manager to get paid. So we sort of set up a direct deposit. So when they get their income on the 1st of the month, the rent gets paid on the 1st of the month as well. And what is left is theirs to play with. As far as how do you manage the residents that leave and go back into homelessness after being in there, well, of course, the idea is we want to prevent homelessness, so we give them another opportunity to come back into transitional housing as many times as possible, if it's possible. The other thing we try to do is give them aftercare services through our aftercare grant by having the case manager check up on them week to week or once a month or however it may be, so that they do have they still have support from us, even though they've exited our program. So in one breath, we're doing our best to provide them services and giving them the opportunity to come back to program. And at the same time, we're also trying to wrap money sources around them so that they can stay in their homes once they leave, and that money not be an issue.
Yeah, to springboard off what Maurice was saying, I think, giving them skills to manage their money, to reduce their risk of future homelessness and wrapping them around with that and getting them connected with services would at least decrease the chances that they have, that they become more permanently homeless if it happens again. I do want to say I also have experience working with fiduciaries and payees. I've written about it. I've done a bunch of research on it. And the one thing I think that you probably, if you've worked with veterans in people are, you're controlling their money. So I think that there is an inherent, a lot of veterans don't like that. But what we've shown is that what they don't like is the control issue, because they actually at the same time know that they need a safety net. So nowhere is it written that there can't be a collaboration between the payee and the veteran on a budget. They can talk about it. And I think what's happened both clinically and research-wise is when someone who has a payee feels that they have some say in their budget, they feel like they can talk to their payee, it's much less likely to be conflictual, and in fact, they appreciate having that safety net. I think the other thing to realize is with the VA, unlike Social Security Administration for fiduciary, there's actually a step down. So someone who has, it's not necessarily permanent, and a veteran who has a fiduciary can actually be monitored for a certain amount of time. I think it's about a year. I'm not 100% sure. But they could actually get off having the fiduciary if they show that they can manage their money on their own, which is a very recovery-oriented idea too. But I think the key would be collaboration if possible. It's not always possible, but it's that, anyway, that's what the research has shown.
I guess just to follow up to that, because a couple of people have asked, how do you find these fiduciary options, as we have a hard time finding them for veterans in general? So you're saying collaboration, but is there maybe places people aren't looking or approach to go about doing that?
One of the ways we do it, we use our VA liaisons, but we go to a lot of different community meetings where we find these services because we were at the meeting, and that's how we found the resource. A lot of times we've already partnered with a particular agency and it's already built into their system. So that's essentially how you would find it. It's not that it's hard to find, you just have to ask your entities if they have a payee process or a fiduciary support system.
Sure, okay. This question came in during your presentation, Maurice, but you guys are welcome to both chime in. How do you deal with resistance from veterans with money management, or also implementing your rules and regulations with harm reduction and a person-centered approach? So for example, if you have a resident who returns to the program intoxicated or violates your program rules, how are you dealing with that?
So we have it set up so that the rules are already established when they meet with us in the very beginning. And if and when a resident does come back drunk, it's not grounds for discharge from program. What would be grounds for discharge from program would be you bringing the alcohol or the drugs inside the building. So coming from the harm reduction method, I meet you where you are and let you know what my rules are, which is you cannot bring it in the building. That does not mean you cannot be intoxicated, but if you are, I may put you in my safe room, especially if you get violent and for the safety of others in the building. So we have a safe room established for them. In order to deal with the resistance, a lot of the ways that we deal with the resistance is being open and honest about it. So I have my house meeting and I bring up the rules and regulations. And when they want to have an issue or complain about it, it's not that I'm going to change my rule, but I am going to listen. And I will say, let me think about that if it is possible to change or adapt. The resistance is cut down when they understand that the rules are the rules and we are firm about them and we don't flip-flop. One of the things I instill in my staff is don't do something on one shift that you're not going to do on the other shift. Every shift should be doing the same thing, so residents get the same message, and residents can't staff split, because that does happen sometimes too. But again, we have open communication with them. We post the rules, we review the rules, we make sure the liaisons are on board with our rules, and we make sure we're consistent in implementing our rules. That's how we manage some of the results.
Gotcha. Okay, so there's a couple of questions still coming in about like the very structure of your program, and then like the amount of people you're serving. I guess one question I want to end on, and I want to give the emails out so everybody can follow up with you both individually if they have more, but what are tangible ways and things you can do to make your staff feel supported in this type of work?
So one of the things that we do to make my staff feel supported is we listen and we give them time to vent, but we also give them some days, I don't want to say we give them days off, but we allow them to take a mental health day. And even during COVID, we're in the process of making it so that they can work from home one day out of the week, so that they can stay out of the office and get some other things done. We feed my staff. That's another thing that we do to show appreciation. We feed them. So every now and then there'll be a brisket brought in, or some sides brought in, or some sweets, and we'll show their appreciation that way. We also show appreciation to our staff by just sitting back and, like I said, just listening and hearing their ideas and allowing them to get it off their chest, or being able to implement things that they want to see done. And and we have this thing called Fun Day. So one of the things that the staff gets to do is, and I do it for the residents, we haven't had it in a while, but we have Fun Day where we have softball day, and staff and residents play the softball game against each other, and we barbecued outside. And we just had a day where it was, yeah, we were at work, but it was a fun day at work, and it was our chance to bond with both the residents and the staff outside of the normal work environment. So simple things like that is what we do.
Very well. All right, if you guys both, we'll go Marie first and then Eric. If you will, just give out your email address if anybody wants to follow up with you guys individually.
You want me to type it into the chat box? I can't hear you. You're muted, Jasmine.
Sorry. Just wanted to say thank you to you guys again. A lot of the feedback that's coming through is like, oh, this is so helpful, and thank you, great information. And, you know, throughout both of your presentations, kind of, oh, yeah, I hadn't thought about that, or, oh, we're doing that. So, you know, thank you guys both for sharing the information, and obviously thank you to all of the attendees for participating. The session itself will be recorded and shared with everybody. Slides will be sent out at a later date, so if you want to actually go back and look at the studies more in depth, then you're welcome to do that. And just for the people who are not able to see the chat, Maurice's email is mcarter, the @ symbol, N like Nancy, D like dog, vet.org, and Eric is Eric, Elbergen @va.gov. So that way you guys can follow up with them. And I think David's sending it out again to all attendees. Sorry, these sessions are so short, but it was great information. And yeah, hope to see you guys the rest of the week. Thank y'all again.
Thank y'all for having us. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.